Hello, everybody, and welcome to Perfectly Frank Conversations. I'm Frank Clark, and today my guest is Mitch Jackson. Welcome, Mitch.
Hey, Frank, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on today. I'm to speak with you, and I've watched a number of your blabs. I've asked you questions in blabs, and I'm excited to get the chance to have some one-on-one time and understand a little bit more about what you're doing in your business and in live stream. And you were just starting to talk about an exciting new project that you're working on. So before we get started, though, if you could give people a sense of your law practice and your specialty in web-based
Sure.
I'd appreciate it.
Sure. We're in our 30th year of practicing law, and what Lisa and I do, my wife is my partner. We met in law school, and the reason we became lawyers is to protect people who either don't have the ability or the means to protect themselves. Most of the time we're representing injured people in catastrophic injury and wrongful death cases. We also handle business-to-business litigation, and we've had some success over the years. Really love live streaming, really love social media because it allows us to help more people than ever before, and that's what I'm excited about. And, been online since 1996. Been engaged in social since day one, and then over the last 3, 4, 5 years in different forms of live streaming. And I think live streaming is a game changer, Frank. I mean, I love using these platforms not to talk law. I love using these platforms to basically communicate our human side and really try to help the world be a better place. That's the game plan. It's not always easy, but that's the game plan.
No, it's not. But that's a noble outcome, and as we've seen, and we touched on this briefly, there's a lot of bad behavior, not just in the real world, but obviously here on the web, which has been going on for decades already, as long as the web itself. People have engaged in every kind of crime, identity theft, fraud, prostitution, drug dealing. It's all here, just like in the real world, because it's still people using the web, right?
As much as things have changed, they've remained the same. And now there's just a bigger audience with more amplification. Along those lines, based upon what's been happening the last couple of weeks with live streaming and on some of the other social platforms, Frank, what happens with us is because people know we're lawyers, we always get the confidential email, the confidential DM, a concern about somebody or what have you. And oftentimes I can't talk about it. What we're setting up today, and it'll be live this afternoon, is we're setting up a page on our website where people can report criminals, scammers, con artists into a database. And it will be quasi-public, quasi-private, but this database will then be displayed for everyone to see on a back page website that people can have access to. And the point is to help people do their due diligence when doing business, when engaging, when interacting with other people that maybe they don't know. It's primarily on the live streaming platforms. That's where my passion is. So we're trying to be very careful about what type of weight we put on information that's submitted to the database. We're trying to be very careful about not providing inaccurate information. But, one thing I've learned over the years, Frank, 30 years of practicing, is if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck and enough people have problems with that duck, it's probably a duck. So we'll be rolling that out this afternoon. And if anyone's interested in contributing information, I'll be sharing the link on Twitter at Mitch Jackson.
That's awesome. So you definitely, you definitely want to follow Mitch Jackson on Twitter and here on Blab. Mitch is an incredible contributor. He's frequently on Blab and always with an eye toward adding value and educating people about the hazards of things. Like one of the things I saw you talking about was copyright issues. So people aren't aware that, they may unintentionally be infringing on people's copyrights by holding up the wrong picture or playing music in the background. It's something, right, that people need to be aware of.
Yeah, it's a big problem right now. The good news is that copyright law, intellectual property right law, IP law, everything that applied offline primarily applies online. This is just a different venue. It's a different channel. So for people who are curious as to whether or not you have the right to display a photo, like these photos behind me during a live stream, these are my photos. I took them. My wife took them. I have the right to display them on a live stream. But, the question is, if you have the right to display a photo, a video, listen to music while you're live streaming. The basic answer is under the law in most states. And by the way, Frank, I am a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer or the lawyer of anyone in the audience. And the laws are different in each state and depending on what the issues are from a federal copyright level. But the bottom line is if you don't have permission of the person who created the content, you probably don't have the legal right to use it in your live stream. I don't want to be that lawyer
if you could just clarify that, because if you don't have permission, I think what you mean is legal, like written permission somewhere in an email or a letter of some kind.
Well, let's just say permission. Okay. Because look, oral permission, oral contracts are valid as are written contracts in most situations. They don't have the same usability in a court of law. I always tell people get things in writing, get permission in a written letter, certified mail, FedEx, in an email, something you can print out and hold out. Hey, Frank gave me permission to use his startup Con Live sign that's right behind him on my next broadcast. You just want to avoid any misunderstandings or ambiguities when using other people's content. There are exceptions, and some of the exceptions, they fall under what's called the fair use doctrine. If I'm reporting a news event, if I'm critiquing somebody else's music or photograph or artwork, things like that, if it's being used in a classroom setting, there are certain gray area exceptions to using, displaying, watching, and listening to other people's intellectual property, okay? But it's a gray area. It's not black and white. So if for some reason you feel the need where you need to absolutely use somebody else's content, talk to a lawyer, get permission. And if you can't get permission from the artist, from the creator of that content, talk to a lawyer in your state to determine whether or not your intended use falls under one of the exceptions. It's complicated, but it's a real issue that we all need to pay attention to.
Yeah, and I think, it's important because people might be familiar vaguely with the concept of this, like when you're watching a movie or a television show, and back in the 70s, 80s, you would see people drink like a beer or a soda, and it would just say soda with no brand on it or an artificial brand, okay, because they didn't have the rights or they didn't have the agreement to display a Coca-Cola or a Budweiser on the screen. But these days, people are, just may not be aware, or what are the implications? If I were to have a branded soft drink in my hand while I'm promoting something, are there any copyright implications for something as simple and as innocuous as having a branded item on your camera that you're disseminating, let's say, for profit?
Yeah, everything I just said still applies. And it's a complicated area. If you look over in the comments at the live video campus, that link right there, that's Kathy Hackle's event in Atlanta. I'll be speaking at the very beginning of March. And the reason I'm flying out and speaking at this event, Frank, is to talk to big brands, to talk to Fortune 500 companies about the implications of copyright and intellectual property law with their online live streaming marketing efforts. It's a big, complicated situation. And the bottom line is, if you don't own the rights to a photo, a label, something on my coffee cup right here, this right here, Danny Hills High School Dolphins, if I don't own the right to display this, then I probably shouldn't be doing it, okay? We need the promotion, okay, our soccer and football team, so I'm just going to roll the dice and go for it. And the other issue, the other issue is the reality is, and people need to know this, when I spoke at Periscope Summit New York, the very first Summit Live event, I did some research before participating on the panel discussion on these issues. I didn't see a single live streaming copyright lawsuit filed in my legal databases up to that point in time across the United States. When you do this, it doesn't mean you're going to get sued. It just means that you're creating potential legal liability. So just be careful with what you do. And what I was going to say earlier, Frank, is I don't want to be that lawyer in the room that, oh, geez, a lawyer's ruining all the fun for all of us. I dig this stuff. I enjoy the benefits of live streaming. I get how powerful it is. I don't necessarily like all this legal stuff getting in the way, but I think it's really, really important to at least be aware of what your rights are, what your responsibilities are, what your exposure is before you press that button and go live. That's what it's all about.
Absolutely. And I know, Getty Images, for example, is very aggressive in pursuing, if you copy an image that turns out to be one of their images that you see on another website on the web, even if you were to snip it or something like that, they've got web bots constantly crawling the web looking for that, and you will get a letter and you will get a lawsuit very, very quickly if you're doing that. So it's a very serious issue, and there are hard consequences that can happen, very, very quickly. You think, oh, I'm just a little website, nobody's going to see it, but they've got web bots just like Google crawling, looking for their intellectual property and making sure that their licenses are being honored and enforced.
Yeah, and I think along the same lines, you want to watch out for scam artists. There are a lot of fake companies out there purporting to do just that. They're shakedown organizations. Some actually have lawyers in front of them that are sending out, just mass emails trying to shake a little bit of money out of small business owners. And here in California, we had some big problems with that. And it finally took somebody to stand up and call bullshit on this company. And long story short, the district attorney's office and attorney general got involved and shut these companies and lawyers down. So you just got to be aware of who you're dealing with, be aware of what you're doing. And but even more importantly, just practice the golden rule when it comes to live streaming. That's what it's all about.
I'm going to pop in a question from Leland Best, which is, wouldn't that only be an issue if you're selling the video audio for profit? And I think we know the answer to that, but
yeah, and that's just it. Is just keep in mind the answer, generally speaking, subject to my earlier disclaimer, is it's an issue regardless if you're profiting or not. And it's an issue if the artist doesn't actually formally copyright the material, the article, the painting, the audio. Just because you don't see a copyright symbol next to it, just because it hasn't been formally copyrighted with the federal government, that doesn't mean that those copyright laws still don't apply. It does change the amount of damages that a harmed owner can go after you for, whether or not they're actual damages or statutory damages. But once again, you don't ever want to find yourself at a point in time in your life where you're arguing over which damages somebody can come after you for. You don't even want to be in that spot in the first time, right? So the point is just get permission. And look, we've all used other people's pictures and images we found on Google, especially early users on the internet before these issues really kind of resonated with all of us. The takeaway, hopefully, Frank, from this show is for everyone just to think a little bit more before doing it again. That's what it comes down to.
And that's my outcome for the show as well. I want people to understand, because a lot of people are new to live stream and they don't understand the implications and the regulations and the issues around specifically copyrights, trademarks, and things like that, and how quickly and easily they can be enforced and suddenly be, facing consequences that they were not anticipating. And that's why I recommend people have a clean, clear background in back of them.
A
simple question from Durham Skywriter on the same lines, but
yeah,
shout out.
And she asked, how about if it's done as a shout out? I once drank from a glass that had a rival newspaper's logo. I held it up and gave them a friendly toast. I think the reality, the black and white legal issue would be probably not okay. Okay. The reality is probably not a big deal. The reality is smart businesses today are encouraging live streamers to properly place their brands within the live stream for additional promotion. What a great way to amplify your message. And so, it's one of these things where I see the laws actually changing quite a bit because of social and live streaming over the next 5 to 10 years. Product placement right now, what we see a lot is, you'll see a television show or a live stream where there's a product carefully and tactfully placed within the screen, whatever it might be. And there's a lot of money right now that's being paid to have a company's product placed within a television or movie screens, the audience's view. And I see that happening with live streaming. Frank, one of the big things I see happening with live streaming is influencer endorsement issues. Okay. When people are endorsing for example, Mark's .live domains. Okay. Mark Gawaith, who's in our chat, has the right side of the dot, custom domains, dot social, dot live, okay, dot lawyer, dot attorney, just amazing tools. And if I'm endorsing them and they're paying me to promote their products and services, and I am an influencer endorser for different legal products, I really have to make sure that I'm letting my audience know my relationship with the company who has reached out and asked me to endorse their products or services. Okay, and that's under the FTC rules and regulations. And I see a lot of online influencers and endorsers not make that connection very clear. That applies to bloggers, it applies to live streamers, and anyone else that's sharing information on the internet. So you want to be careful. At streaminglawyer.com, Frank, I think it was last week, I actually did a Periscope on that topic, and I included a link to an FTC PDF download that lays out what the rules are. If you're an endorser, if you're an influencer, and you're promoting somebody else's product or service because it's the best out there, you believe in it, okay, and all of that's really, really good, there are some things you need to do to make sure the consumer understands that relationship. So it's all right there at streaminglawyer.com or streaming.lawyer.
So a recent example everybody's probably familiar with was Peyton Manning in the Super Bowl when they were interviewing after the game, and he twice mentioned he was going to not just have a beer, but have a specific beer.
You know, and I missed that. I didn't see how it went down. I did hear about it after the fact. And yeah, that's interesting. That's very, very interesting. I mean, I'm not going to comment one way or the other, but I mean, if I think I read someplace that Budweiser was not paying him to say that. Is that your understanding also?
I didn't read more about it, but I was just shocked to hear him say it twice in a post-game interview of the Super Bowl. It was just like, really? You're going to mention a specific brand? It's like,
yeah.
Because even if he wasn't being endorsed, everybody who watches it and doesn't do the research is thinking, okay, he's pimping for Bud, right?
Yeah, but for example, when I mentioned Mark's, .live, right side of the domain, custom domains, they're not paying me to do that. I just think they're really, really cool domains. I mean, they really help you differentiate what you're doing. The show that Jen Hoverstad and I have, the show .live, I mean, that .live tells everybody what our show is all about. I love it. They're not paying me to say that, so I don't have to disclose anything. But if they were, I would definitely want to point out that relationship to the audience.
Yeah, and there's a whole business around that on the web, which is affiliate marketing. Okay, in affiliate marketing, you're getting paid for endorsements to promote a specific brand or a specific product or company.
Right.
And there's there's legal implications around that, but then there's ethical implications around that. So it's a very valid. But if you're out there, promoting something, you should, make some disclosure that, this is an affiliate and I am being paid to promote this.
Yeah, there aren't any magic words that are required. I mean, let's take this back to the digital platforms, as far as our conversation goes, as opposed to the football field after a Super Bowl. But because there are actually different rules and regulations with social media and live streaming than there are with television. It's two different. Of course. They're crossing over now, but it's actually two different entities that are monitoring and controlling those two platforms with respect to requirements. And one's the FCC and one's the FTC. And with social media and digital live streaming, things like this, the bottom line is there aren't any magic words. You just have to be clear and concise. You can't leave any ambiguity in the consumer or end user's mind as to what your relationship is, if any, with the product that you're endorsing. I see that as a big problem too. So
let's change the topic a little bit to what we were talking before we started the recording, which is the issue of fraudulent behavior on the web, and most recently here in the live stream world, where people have made misrepresentations and possibly fraudulent or criminal type of activity, and what you're doing regarding that.
Well, I'm not sure I understand the scope of your question, but I think what people need to understand is just because something happens on social media or the digital platforms, the reality is offline laws, civil rules and regulations, criminal laws, they still apply to online conduct. And in fact, I think you could argue that if you do something wrong online, if you defraud somebody, if you take somebody's money, if you breach a contract, if you provide unsafe products and services to the end user, you're probably amplifying your legal exposure, both civilly and criminally, substantially more so than if you weren't, because you're using electronic communications to communicate your message over state lines.
Exactly.
And now what you're doing is you're pulling in the federal government, the federal investigators, under the U.S. code, which are the federal codes that dictate criminal conduct. The federal jurisdiction now kicks in to help protect people from all over the country as opposed to just in a single state. And the other issue is when something's said or done on these live streaming platforms, regardless if you're recording it or not, it's on somebody's server, and the district attorney's office, the attorney general's office, their investigators can get access to the files and use what you've said, even if it's a mea culpa type of apology, admitting fault to something. They can use that in a state or federal criminal investigation, as they should be able to do. So this just really raises the bar, when it comes to long-term implications with wrongful conduct. And on the other side of the coin, it really helps investigators prove their case. We were up in Northern California for a wedding, really cool little mining town just outside of Yosemite, .com, millennial type of wedding deal. It's really, really cool.
Nice.
But while we were up there out of Sacramento, there were two gangbangers that were using Periscope, driving through the streets looking for someone to take them out and broadcasting it to the world. Excuse me real quick. And all of this was being broadcasted live on Periscope. And the next day, the police officers, they actually knew who these gangbangers were. They recognized him on scope, and they made the arrest the next morning. So in a way, this type of technology can really help make our society a safer place if it's used by people who are, who have the tools and mechanisms to effectuate the arrest and to prosecute the bad guys.
So that brings up an interesting question I had, which is what other jurisdictions, you mentioned the FCC and FTC, but also you're bringing in potentially things like the FBI, the Postal Service, if you're doing mail fraud in some way, if somebody's mailing you a check across state lines or something like that, you're inviting additional regulatory scrutiny from multiple federal agencies, and you're documenting it along the way by being on the web.
You're making it easy for the good people to hold the bad people accountable. And what's wrong with that? So The bottom line, though, is what I noticed, the questions we got up in San Francisco, Frank, at Summit Live, we had a legal panel, and primarily the most often asked questions, we had a line like the DMV. I mean, it was a popular panel.
Right. And
the questions that were being asked had to do, more so had to do less with what we're talking about when it comes to the legal issues, and more so with, I want to do business using the live streaming platforms. What do I need to do? And the things that we talked about were incorporating, forming an LLC. Frank, if you jump online and you're selling a product or service, it's really important that you let your viewers know that you're conducting this live stream on behalf of the XYZ company. Now let's dive into all the benefits this product has, and the special deal that I'm going to be selling it to you for today or over the next 24 hours. A lot of people are jumping on the live streaming platforms, and you can't differentiate between whether or not it's me as an individual or am I actually listening to a representative of a company. And if a consumer can reasonably take the position that, geez, I thought I was dealing with Frank Clark as an individual, not his company. Well, if something goes bad, they can sue Frank Clark as an individual, as opposed to just your company, which is a great liability, a wall that protects your personal assets from your business liabilities. So that was a big issue that came up, I think, at Summit Live in San Francisco.
Yeah.
But most people don't think it through.
We're getting a few other questions. I want to make sure that we come back to address the action you're taking that you were announcing in terms of what you're doing on your website and in creating the database. So if you could tell people a little bit about that.
I will, Frank. Thanks for bringing it up. But there's a comment over here by Ember Studio. And he's talking about, he hates to say it, but he thinks that live streaming is going to come into play when it comes to vehicular accidents. We've already had 2 cases. This is not new. We have had major catastrophic injury cases involving the use of cell phones while driving, people texting and driving. That's why I'm so adamant about distracted driving. Don't live stream and drive. Don't do anything that's going to distract you while driving. And I've seen how it will change lives. Well, over the last 6 months, we've already been contacted twice by families who have been involved in accidents because somebody was live streaming and driving. That's why I'm so adamant about this. You know what's interesting, Frank, is people don't realize that 9 people a day are killed because of distracted driving. 4,000 to 6,000 people are killed each year. Every single second in the United States, between 400,000 and 600,000 people are operating a motor vehicle during daylight hours in a distracted fashion, whether they're looking at a device, they're reaching over and not paying attention to what they're doing, or they're looking back and talking to somebody in the back seat. And those numbers are not okay. When you look at the fact that the average distracted driver is distracted, at one time they thought it was about 5 seconds. Now they're determining that it's about 19 seconds from when you're first distracted to when you're refocused 100% back on the road. But at 5 seconds at 50 miles an hour, that's like driving the length of a football field with a blindfold over your eyes. You know, something bad is going to happen. Yeah. So I have zero tolerance for that kind of stuff. So yeah, unfortunately, these cases are already happening. And I got to tell you something. If you're periscoping while you're driving down the street and you blow through a red light and you kill somebody, not only will you civilly be held responsible from a financial standpoint, there's a pretty darn good chance you're going to go to jail for a long time for vehicular manslaughter. Okay, society's not putting up with this. And while I've got the microphone, Frank, what really bothers me is there are still influencers out there, so-called influencers, who are scoping and driving. And it's not okay because other people are watching them do this. They don't understand the risk and the dangers. And they've actually told me, well, Mitch, if you don't like it, get off my scope. Now, I try to be respectful, and that's fine. I'm not their mom. I'm not their dad. It's not my job to tell them how to run their lives. But you know what? It's not about them. It's about the people that they're going to hurt. And that's the part that really bothers me. And I would encourage everyone, if you're on a scope, if you're on a blab, any type of live streaming platform, and somebody is scoping and driving, respectfully let them know you don't appreciate them doing that. Not only are they putting themselves at risk, but even more importantly, they're putting other people at risk, and then get off the scope. That's what I would like everybody to do. Now, I'm going to get off that soapbox. And with respect to online crime, online scams, things like this, you know, I've been around this stuff for 30 years. This is nothing new to me. I'm pretty hardened towards it. But with the stuff that's been happening the last couple of weeks, specifically with multiple people, multiple companies, I'm not talking about anybody in particular, it kind of does open up, you know, the wound to some things I've seen some clients go through in the past, and it's just not okay. The other reality is I've noticed there's people that they just don't get it. They think that I'm almost listening to people say, well, it's okay that this is happening. This is the way everybody does business online. And that's a bunch of bullshit. That's not the way everybody else does business online. The way you do business online is you have to be honest. You have to be transparent. You don't fudge the numbers. You don't make up facts or statistics. You don't take people's money without paying people back. Okay? You practice the golden rule. That's where the bar needs to be. There are no exceptions. All right? I've been around enough criminals in my life as a lawyer where once you see a pattern of conduct, what you want to do, people, is you want to report those people to local police authorities, let them take care of it. They're not people you want to be around. They're not people you want to be around because you're going to get hurt and you're going to get taken to the bank. So what we're doing is hopefully we'll be rolling out this afternoon. I think it's done, but we're going to be rolling out a database, a website page that people can go to and share the names and contact information of people who have scammed them, who have defrauded them, who have participated in criminal conduct. And it'll be a database that everyone can have access to and check out before doing business with other people. Okay. And Nick's asking, will I put that at the streaminglawyer.com website? Here's the deal. I'll put a link there, Nick, The streaminglawyer.com website is a free WordPress site that I purposefully set up that way because I want to show young lawyers how they can inexpensively start their own practice as entrepreneurs. And that website is my example for using the free WordPress platform to do just that. And I did that before Social Media Day San Diego almost a year ago, and it's really taken off. But the tools that I use for database and contact management won't work on a free WordPress site. So I'm backdooring it on my law firm site, which is jacksonandwilson.com. It's also mylawyerrocks.com. And I'll be putting the page and database there, but I will link over from streaming.lawyer since that's where a lot of people know me from the live streaming arena. And the bottom line is, you guys, is I want to be able for people to go in, share their concerns, check out people they're doing business with, and then it's part of a due diligence type of process, right, Frank? That's what it comes down to.
Like a Better Business Bureau for the web and live stream.
I mean, it's a matter of doing your due diligence before sending somebody money, agreeing to do a business with somebody. Earlier this week, I did a scope. It's at streaming.lawyer, and I shared 6 resources that you can use online to do background checks on other people and background checks on other people, on other companies. And you don't have to use all 6. Some are free, some are paid. It's a good idea for people to use 1 or 2 of those resources, check somebody out before doing business with them, before sending them a check, before giving them your PayPal information. And it'll probably save you a lot of sleepless nights. It'll probably save you a lot of legal fees if you decide you want to go after the scam artists in the world, because what happens is it's expensive to go after these people, and most of them don't have the money anyway by the time you get a judgment against them. I've got several multi-million-dollar judgments sitting in my drawer right now. One's against a lawyer for legal malpractice, okay? And they're not worth any more than the paper they're written on, because the defendant doesn't have anything. There's no insurance covering the wrongful conduct.
Right.
So what I prefer to see happen is that people avoid getting themselves in bad situations from the very beginning. You know, that's the key.
This will be the last question, because I want to respect your time. And you can do it in 30 seconds. I know we're running out of time.
Frank, take your time. I'm on a roll now. I'm enjoying this. We're covering good content.
So I hear the right lawyer will help you improve, build your business rather than just avoid risk. And I think that was what you were just commenting on, which is why I brought it into the chat.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, one of the resources we use when we're advising clients, when we're litigating cases, are companies like Nick's. Nick's vice president of experts.com, and they share outstanding experts with professionals, lawyers like me. And so if I'm telling the world, a jury, a district attorney, an attorney general, that this is a bad company, oftentimes I need an expert to go through the documents to show that it's a shell corporation and to help me make that case. So I actually use companies like Nick's to get the experts on big cases. Okay, and we're talking 6- and 7-figure cases, right, to help make my point. Now, on what we're seeing online, specifically, you know, up until most recently last night, okay, I mean, there was a lot of things going on late last night on Periscope, and the bottom line is oftentimes the numbers don't justify getting a lawyer involved, and I get that. But when you have, you know, a bunch of people getting taken to the bank, $25 here, $75 here, $200 here, it all adds up, and it's a pattern of conduct. Exactly. And all I would encourage people to do, Frank, is contact their local police department, contact their local sheriff department, let them do the investigative research on their dime. It doesn't cost you anything to file a police report, and chances are, and what we've seen, you're not going to be the only victim. Chances are the police officers might actually already know who the person or company is, you know, and that's a really easy way to protect all of us.
Exactly. It's incumbent on us to step up and make that report. And it can be embarrassing if you've gotten taken for, you know, whether it's $50, $500, $5,000 or $50,000. It's embarrassing. You hate to admit it, but you want to make sure, you know, again, the golden rule applies, that other people are not going to get harmed in the same way by this person, because as long as they're free to go out and do it to other people, you're now a part of the problem, because you haven't helped law enforcement do its job and take those people out of society. where they can harm other people. And that's how things like Bernie Madoff got out of control. People who knew didn't say anything or didn't do anything.
And people need to understand the Bernie Madoff situation. We're talking $50 billion, okay? He defrauded and scammed some very, very bright, intelligent people. Many of these individuals didn't do their due diligence and they never directly interfaced with him, but a lot of people did. And the point I'm trying to make is some of the scam artists I've been around down at the courthouse, they're the last people in the world you would ever suspect of doing what they did.
Right.
They're that good. They're that good. And the good ones are very good at it. And they're the kind of person that you invite over for dinner, open up your checkbook, give them all your credit cards because you think you're helping somebody. That's how good these people are. And so what I've noticed on live streaming is that a lot of people have really let their guard down and they buy into what I call the deflective defense. Oftentimes what scam artists will do is instead of fessing up to what's happened and solving the problem, they'll bring in other issues and try to get people to talk about side issues other than what's really going on. And one of the things I like about being a lawyer is that when we're trying cases and I'm going after people who have defrauded my clients, the judge will really help me keep that case on point. The judges will not let these scam artists from the witness stand spend any time going sideways with their excuses. We focus on the issues, we focus on the facts, and that's what I really, really like about having these idiots in court, because I'm in full control over what happens with the help of a judge. And all of a sudden, this power that they've had over the years of manipulating people and deceiving people and dictating and controlling conversations, all of a sudden that power is stripped from them. And you just watch somebody just wither away on the witness stand when they know that they're finally going to be held accountable. The best feeling in the world. Absolutely.
And, you have to, if you're out here, and I call it a little bit of the kumbaya effect. People come onto a platform like a Facebook or a Twitter, and it's new and exciting. And, Blab and Periscope are only less than a year old. They see the supportive community, and they see people trying to help each other or whatever, and they think, oh, it's all good here. This is a great community. Nothing bad could happen here. And they let their guard down, and they don't do their due diligence. And then, obviously, influencers are everywhere, so they're going to be more likely to get taken in. I mean, I came of age. I've been in business for 30 years in New York, right? So I'm used to people being scamsters and fraudsters because you see it every day in the streets, just walking around Grand Central, Times Square, downtown, right? Everybody's trying to play.
It's entertainment. Yeah, that's entertainment, though. I mean,
but so I'm going to post a book real quick here called "Spy the Lie." It's written by a former CIA officer about how to detect fraudulent behavior and lies. And I highly recommend people pick up this book and learn to see the signals of people who are lying to you, and study influence and persuasion, learn to protect yourself.
KP_Kelly indicated in the comments that he appreciates the fact that we didn't share any particular names, and that's not my intent, obviously. Yeah. I'm trying to share general principles and general safety concerns. I'm not out to bash anyone or anything. I haven't seen all the facts. I haven't seen all the issues. I'm pretty good at picking a jury and reading people. I have a pretty good idea of what did or didn't happen with 3 or 4 separate incidents out there that are pending right now.
I'm aware, but the idea you're probably not even aware of, actually.
Oh, I'm sure what we're talking about and have been talking about the last couple of weeks is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much going on out there with companies and people that we don't even know about. Well, let me just share a couple of thoughts with you. You never know where you're going to run into a con artist. You never know when you're going to run into a criminal, whether it's at the Rotary Club, whether it's the retired sheriff of Los Angeles pleading guilty yesterday to a felony. 50 years of law enforcement service, whether or not it is Sheriff Mike Corona, who was America's sheriff in Orange County, who still owes me lunch, by the way, because of a Rotary function I donated some money to, who went to jail for years because of illegal conduct. This can happen to everyone and anyone. And what's really interesting is I've got a friend who lives on my street. He's a very well-known federal judge, very good at what he does. And he told me one day that 90% of the criminal defendants that are in front of him in his courtroom on any given year, 90% are good people who made bad decisions. Okay, which was interesting to hear him say that. The other 10% were the type of people you would never want to run into on the street. You would never want anyone in your family to associate. They're really, really, really bad people from the core. Now, how do you know who you're interfacing with, that 90% or that 10%? My advice to everybody is to avoid all of that if possible. Exactly. By doing your due diligence. You're going to avoid, because as smart as you think you are, you're not going to be able to outsmart a good scam artist, a good con man. And so the best thing you can do is just do your due diligence and stay away from that type of activity, by using some of the tools we've talked about during today's blab.
I love what you said about 90% of them were otherwise good people who made some bad decisions. There was a great quote I heard years ago when I was in college from a guy, and it was just an informal thing, but he said, look, locks aren't to keep criminals out, they're to keep honest people honest. Because it's very easy for people to say, oh, I'll just, take some office supplies from the office, and it becomes a slippery slope. If you look at was the movie about the Nick Leeson case, I forget the name of the film that was made, but he started out, he had a bad loss in one account, and he just tried to cover it up and figured he'd make it back, and the markets would turn, and he kept making bad decisions. I think something similar happened with Bernie Madoff. They didn't start out as con artists. They just made some really bad decisions, tried to cover things up, and it kept getting worse and worse and worse.
But along those lines, that first bad decision may have been out of desperation. It may have been without a lot of thought. It's the ongoing pattern that the criminal activity starts displaying itself. Okay,
right.
It's the first time, shame on you. The second time, shame on me. And KP Kelly asked a really interesting question. It's something that I've thought about, and it has to do with, can live streaming networks themselves be held civilly liable for accidents where somebody is using their platform while driving and who causes an accident? And I think the answer, KP Kelly, looking at early internet law cases, early website use cases, and things like that, is generally speaking, across the country, different states are addressing that issue in different ways. I think from a public policy standpoint, my personal take is the better approach would be to encourage the use of the digital platforms, to encourage the responsible use of, for example, Google Glass, if you'll remember when Google Glass came out.
Right.
And just because somebody makes a platform available, so just because Periscope is out there for people to use, if someone's periscoping or blabbing and gets in an accident and it's their fault, I don't think that you should be able to hold Periscope or blab responsible. And right now, under the laws here in California, you can't. And I'm okay, and that's the way it should be. Now, if you have a platform that comes out that's called Scoping and Driving, and they encourage people to scope and drive with the understanding of what these numbers are. As a matter of fact, you can't even use our app unless your ignition is on and you're traveling over 45 miles an hour.
Right.
Okay. If somebody comes out with that type of app, then I think you can hold them responsible. It's like putting a loaded gun in the hand of a child. Something bad's going to happen.
Right.
There's a notice issue. Otherwise, I think the public policy concerns would dictate, let's make these platforms available, and let's encourage smart use.
Right, and maybe it becomes incumbent on a Blab or a Periscope to put warnings and disclaimers on their site, etc. However, that's like putting warning labels on cigarettes. It's like people who are going to smoke are still going to smoke. So it's incumbent on all of us to be responsible.
Yeah, I mean, and I see KP Kelly's comment. When you look at guns and cigarettes and unsafe drugs and alcohol, then you've got political arguments that come into play, and lobbyists and big money, and that's a whole nother blab for another time. But the point is it's a very convoluted regulatory analysis that has to happen with any new type of technology, right? And for me as a lawyer, that's what keeps things exciting. I mean, one of the things I love most about what I do for a living is every single day it's something different's happening, whether it's here at my office or on the other side of the country.
Right.
And with the digital platforms and live streaming, the laws are changing, how we're doing business is changing. And because of that, it keeps life interesting. And that's why I love being on shows like this, Frank, and jumping on and answering questions and just shooting from the hip. I mean, it just keeps life interesting, and that's what makes these platforms so darn powerful.
Well, you mentioned time again, and I just want to honor that because we've already run over your allotted time from your perspective. I'm happy to keep talking to you until you've got to run out and do whatever you've got to do.
I'm getting the hook. I know I'm getting the hook, so we should probably wrap this up. But Frank, this has been awesome, and the questions from our guests. I mean, we've got people from around the world. What a great platform. Isn't this just awesome?
I absolutely love it. And I love what you were saying. And I especially love what I've seen from you. And this just reinforced that and what you're doing proactively to help people protect themselves from bad behavior online. So I acknowledge you. I appreciate you. And I respect you for doing that. It's much, much needed. And I will help become an evangelist to make sure that people know that resource is available. So please let me know, and I can let my audience know and encourage others to do the same. So
I appreciate that, Frank.
I want to say thank you. So again, if you could just say your best website where people can get in contact with you. I'll post it up in the chat as well.
Sure. I think for purposes of live streaming, if you want to touch base with me, just go to streaming.lawyer. That's streaming.lawyer. My contact information is up there. I share and repost most of my live streams on the different platforms at streaming.lawyer, my contact information there. And then I really enjoy Twitter, so follow me on Twitter at Mitch Jackson. And thank you. Thanks, everyone, for stopping by today, asking your great questions. I love all the comments over on the side. And Frank, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. So I'll stop the recording. And I do want to invite you. I would like to continue this dialogue. I would like to invite you to be my guest on Startup Con Live, because I think this is a very important, relevant issue for startups in this space as well. So we can talk about that offline.
And, how long have we had the live streaming platforms that we're talking about? It's been less than a year, right?
Yeah.
It's crazy. So it'll be interesting to see how things, things are changing at an exponentially fast rate. And once again, that's what keeps things interesting. But that's why we also all need to keep our finger on the pulse of what's right and what's wrong, and always do the right thing. Frank, I've got to run. Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
I appreciate you very much. Take care. Thanks, everybody, for joining and watching today. Again, I'm Frank Clark with Perfectly Frank Conversations.